Hello and welcome back. It's the Andrew Eborn Show, and I'm delighted in this ongoing series of Question Everything to be joined yet again by Philip Mantle. How are you, Philip?
I'm fine, Andrew. Thank you very much.
It's always a thrill. And I'll tell you what, last time we left it, we found out all about you and your mum and how she told you a tale when she was 12 years old. She saw a fairy at the bottom of the garden, and she told that tale not to you, just to you, but also to your family and so on and so forth, and to her sisters. And to her dying day, she would swear that she saw that fairy. And not only that, the fairy had her drink a special liquid, which meant that she would never, ever, ever had an accident. And the bit you do know is that, to your knowledge, she never had an accident.
That's correct. I mean, she had serious ill health throughout her life, you know, bronchitis and breathing problems. But no, I don't ever remember, you know, falling over, getting, glass in her hand, or sticking a fork through her foot while doing the gardening or anything like that. Like I said,
stuff you've done. Have you stuck a fork through your?
I worked in industry, Andrew, so you're bound to have an accident at some point. You can't avoid it, you know. Plus, you know, as a young boy, I'd climb the walls and fall out of trees and that kind of thing, but I don't ever recollect my mum doing anything like that.
Which is brilliant. So that would help confirm. People turn around and say she drank this potion for whatever reason. She never had an accident. You believe, as you said last time, that your mother genuinely felt that she saw a fairy. That's what you believe.
Yes. Yeah.
What you also believe is that it didn't happen, but you believe your mother in her belief.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And that, if you like, sets the pattern of what we've been talking about. Because a lot, when we're looking and digging deeper into these various UFO sightings and the various stories that we've heard about abductions and sightings in the air and alien autopsies, you will say that a lot of the witnesses will fall into a couple of categories. And this is what we're very interested in. They will fall into those who genuinely believe, and they will look for evidence to support their belief, and they're dogged in their belief. They're never going to change whatever happens. And they will always have an explanation for whatever may be a contrary view. They'll just say, well, you would say that or whatever, and they'll dismiss that. There are those, on the other hand, who are complete out-and-out charlatans who know the truth, but will peddle a lie anyway. And there are those in the middle who keep an open mind and say, look, let's hear evidence from both sides, and we will decide.
Yeah. I think that's a fair roundup, yeah.
Okay, so that's all good. So those episodes, we chatted for many, many hours, but you had a nanosecond of a view there, because I think that's really helpful for setting the parameters of where we're going to go now. Because what we're going to do in this series, we're going to take each individual episode and little reportings and very famous ones and maybe not so famous ones, and apply that forensic analysis to those different reports. And that, I think, will help shed a bit of light, more light and less heat on the subject.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And we said that we're going to start in July 1947 in Roswell. Take the story from there.
Yeah, well, you know, everybody knows the name Roswell, and they might just know that's where the flying saucer crashed, if nothing else. But the story goes that in early July, Roswell, New Mexico, during a thunderstorm, something came to ground on the Foster Ranch, which was probably nearer Socorro than it was Roswell. It's out in the desert, the high desert of New Mexico, and the rancher was called Matt Brazel. You know, he leased the land, and he went to check on his sheep one morning, found this silver metallic debris scattered across the landscape, and his sheep wouldn't go anywhere near it. The likes of which, of course, he'd never seen before. So he gathered some of this up, and at some point, not straight away, because in those days, Brazel didn't even have electricity, let alone a telephone. And his nearest neighbor was a lady by the name of Loretta Proctor on a neighboring ranch. And he showed some of this material to Mrs. Proctor. And according to her testimony, you know, some of this metallic material was so very light, like aluminium foil almost, but you could screw it up and you'd let go and it would bounce back into its original shape without a crease.
A sort of memory metal, I think.
It got the nickname memory metal, yeah. So Brazel didn't go into town straight away because, you know, he needed to go for a special reason. He waited while he had something to go for. So he took some of this debris into Roswell and he took it to the sheriff. That was a Sheriff George Wilcox. And he showed it to him and he said, well, I don't know what it is. Now, on the outskirts of Roswell was Roswell Army Air Force. The Army and the Air Force were still joint at this point in time. And they had a military base there that housed the 509th Bomb Wing. And at this point in time, they were the only atomic bomb wing in the world. These guys had flown the atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan. They didn't launch from Roswell, obviously, but it was, so it wasn't some, you know, little Air Force base stuck out in the middle of nowhere. It was a very important military establishment. So Sheriff Wilcox says, it'll be those military guys, we'll give them a ring. So he did. And they sent a gentleman by the name of Jesse Marcel. He was the base intelligence officer. And he brought with him a gentleman by the name of Sheridan Cabot. So they went to the Foster Ranch. And this material was still scattered across, you know, the landscape. They gathered some of this up in the truck. On the way back to the base, Marcel stopped at his home. He didn't live on the base. It was about, I think, about 1 o'clock in the morning. His son, Jesse Marcel Jr., I think was 11 years old at the time, somewhere around that age. So he got his wife and his son out of bed, poured some of this material onto the floor of the kitchen. And Marcel Jr. picked up a piece of it. He said it was, edge on it looked like the capital I, about half an inch, you know, in size, and it was about this long. And it had these strange purple inscriptions on it. Almost, he likened them to be like hieroglyphics. And his father turned to him and said, son, you could be the first person on earth to view writing from another world. He literally said that to him at the time. So he gathered this stuff up back to the base. The base the next day released an official press release. Bearing in mind, flying saucers had only been born a couple of weeks before this. The rumors about flying discs, you know, the Army Air Force at Roswell's got one and they're sending it to higher headquarters for evaluation. This went around the world. It even appeared in the Times, the London Times, a little sort of 1-inch column. Within hours, a retraction was sent. Sorry, made a mistake. It was all a weather balloon, you know. And Marcel was pulled into his boss's office, General Roger Ramey, stand there with some debris. Don't say anything. And they made it out as if there was a lot of press there. There wasn't. There was one press photographer. And he took half a dozen pictures. They went on. And it died. That was it. Roswell was finished. It had literally had its 15 minutes of fame. Gone. It wasn't until then, I think it was 1978, 79, UFO researcher Stanton Friedman was doing a TV show somewhere in the States. And somebody says to him, well, you talked to old boy Marcel. He claimed to handle one of these things back in when he was in the military. Nobody had ever heard of him. Nobody. Stanton Friedman found him, interviewed Marcel Sr. at that point, and that's at that point in the late 1970s when the real investigation into Roswell began. Not back in 1947, but there. And that's how the story came out, Andrew. It really is.
And what's interesting, we touched on this beforehand, it's always when people change the story or there appears to be a cover-up or a bit of evidence is lost, then all of the people who have a conspiracy theory say, aha, there's your smoking gun. Because when you turn around, if the first report was that what landed at Roswell was a flying saucer, and then the story changed to say, oh no, it's just a weather balloon. Well, nobody is going to get confused as to a weather balloon and a flying saucer, are they?
Well, the strange thing about it is, of course, is that Roswell Army Airfield used to launch weather balloons themselves twice a day because they flew in and out of there. They needed to know what weather conditions were. And I believe Marcel Sr. himself had only finished his training in this field a month or two before the incident happened. And what is curious, I mean, he didn't do that many interviews by, sadly he passed away in the sort of early 1980s. But his son, Marcel Jr., went on to be an MD and also served as a doctor in the military, as a flight surgeon. He said, I've never seen the likes of this stuff before or since, Philip. My father, that's why I said to him, okay, let's assume your father went out there that day and mistook a weather balloon for something exotic. Was he demoted? Did he get reprimanded? Was he sent to the American equivalent of Siberia? I suppose that would be Alaska or somewhere like that. He says, no. In fact, later on in his career, he actually got promoted, and I think he ended up working at the Pentagon or somewhere. You would have thought, Andrew, if you made this monumental mistake, what an embarrassment that must have been to the Roswell Army Air Force and the 509th Bomb Group, the only atomic bomb wing in the world, that our base intelligence officer can't recognize a weather balloon, and he turns it into a flying saucer. Surely
that's the problem, isn't it? Because when we're looking, and we say we drill down, and what we're doing in this series is drilling down into, if you like, from a criminal point of view, a criminal case, you turn around and say, beyond reasonable doubt, is this what happened? In a civil matter, we talk about the balance of probabilities.
Yeah.
All we can do, because we weren't there, all we can do is examine the evidence and say, well, okay, let's look at the different explanations that are put up. So the first thing we have is something lands. We all know that something's land, and people basically were so surprised at it landing, they raised the alarm. We also know at that time that air balloons, which are done for weather balloons and so on and so forth, were dropping, not like flies, but it was a fairly regular occurrence, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So people, if it had been, let's deal with this one first, if it had been a weather balloon, people would have known about it and they wouldn't have raised an eyebrow, would they?
You wouldn't think so, because not only that, there was a kind of a little reward for the recovered weather balloons, because they could recycle them. So some of the locals got to recognize what they were. And of course, if they were in the desert for any time, they didn't keep their sheen on them. They used to turn like a dirty brown color. They would decay, even Brazel, although he was a rancher, he wasn't stupid by any description, and he was as puzzled. He took it to the sheriff. The sheriff didn't recognize it. So you take it to the military, and hey, presto, they don't know what it is either. So you've got locals, you've got people in authority, and then you've got the military themselves, all left scratching their head. And even the man who released the press release, he was a gentleman called Walter Hort. He said they came into my office and dictated it to me. I didn't make it up myself. They dictated the press release to me, and off it went. There's even a little radio recording. And there's a connection to a famous game show, Opportunity Knocks. Remember Huey Green?
I remember Huey Green very, very
Huey
well.
Green wasn't English, he was Canadian.
There you go. And his daughter, Paula Yates. But
Yes.
that's another story, absolutely.
Well, Huey Green was in the area at the time, and he heard them announce it on the radio.
Ah.
So, but we have the radio recording anyway, and off it went. Like I said, it went around the world. Sheriff Wilcox was getting telephone calls from here, there, and everywhere. And he didn't know what to do with it. And then, of course, they put out the official explanation the following day. And that was it. It literally died. This was a different era, Andrew, when people in authority made a statement. A lot of people tended to side with it just after the war. The Cold War was just sort of getting warmed up. Much different to the era we live in now, of course, where you don't believe a word anybody tells you sometimes, So that's how it all began. And of course, once Stanton Friedman got his teeth into it, others did as well. The first book came out not long after. It was very badly written, but it got Roswell into the public domain. And as a result, others came forward and said, well, I was there at the time, I was at the base. Researchers found people as well because of the records that were kept at the base. And then there was a few TV specials done that again drew more people out of the woodwork, some good, some bad, you know. And then it literally took off. Roswell, as a result, became a household name. It really did. Like I say, you can probably go anywhere in the world and say, have you ever heard of Roswell? And they say, oh yeah, the spaceship crashed there. That's probably all they know, but that's it.
And obviously people have, again, when you're looking at the evidence, people have a vested interest to keep the myth going. If you're Roswell as a place, you want to turn around, it's quite good. It's probably quite good for business, isn't it? Saying this is the place where you have the alien landing, or this is where a spaceship crashed. Rather similar, if you like, to Loch Ness. You want to turn around and say, there must be Nessie over there. You've got the wonderful myth. And people like the romanticism, if you like,
of course they do.
Having that myth.
Yeah, and of course in Roswell, there is the Roswell UFO Research Center and Museum. There are some associated shops around it and a cafe. I think Roswell is the only place in the world that has a themed McDonald's. I've been in it, and I think every other McDonald's is like everyone you've ever been in, but the one in Roswell is not. It's a UFO themed McDonald's.
Wonderful.
And before the financial crash of 2008, plans were on the drawing board to build a theme park in the area, literally. And sadly it never got off the ground. But there is a festival there every year that lasts for about a week. I've been there. I had the honor of lecturing at the museum in 2007. And they have floats driving down the street with people dressed as aliens. They have rock bands play, a bit of everything. Some serious, some very light-hearted. But once you move away from sort of that central piece of Roswell, if you went to another part of it, you would never know. It's just like any other American town. But they have a famous saying in Roswell, we're 200 miles from anywhere. And they are even today. To get there is not the easiest thing in the world. And once you drive out of the town, for example, we drove out. I was making a small documentary. We drove out to the so-called crash site where it happened. I would never have found it in 1,000 years. It is the high desert. That even today it's not an easy place to find. So you go back to 1947 when Matt Brazel comes out that morning and he's got no electricity, no telephone, I'll deal with it later. I've got more important things to do. And that's the way he did.
Yeah. Quite exciting. So what does the McDonald's have that made it themed? What sort of things do they have there?
It's mainly paintings and murals, and it's shaped like a flying saucer.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah. And when I was there in 2007, there's all big UFO paintings all around the outside as well. And of course, the little things they give away with your food every now and again, I think those are every now and again are alien related. Even when you go to the center of Roswell, the lampposts, the light at the top is shaped like an alien with two black eyes on it.
Wonderful. So we love all that sort of stuff. So we understand there's an incentive to keep the myth, the romantic myth going. Has the official explanation, has that changed since 1947?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it took a drastic change in the 1990s. First off, there was the senator of New Mexico. He was called Schiff, and he kept getting inquiries from some of his people about, So he set off what's called an investigation of his own. They have something in America called the General Accounting Office, which basically keeps tabs on, supposedly keeps tabs on what the government does, where their spending goes. And he set them on it to look for records, any records pertaining to Roswell. And of course, they didn't find any, nothing. What was interesting is what they didn't find, all the outgoing and incoming records from Roswell at Army Air Force Base at that time, they'd gone missing. You know, nobody could find them. So Senator Schiff did his own investigation. That spurred the Air Force, the US Air Force, to say, well, we'll do one. Okay. So they did their own investigation, and hey presto, it changed again. It wasn't a weather balloon. Well, in fact, it was, but it was now called Project Mogul. What Project Mogul was, they actually used weather balloons, and they had equipment underneath it, and they rose into the upper atmosphere, and they were looking for signs of Soviet atomic bombs, because you couldn't necessarily see them. They may be way out where, but the residue would be in the upper atmosphere. And this equipment underneath the balloons that could detect this material. So the balloons weren't secret. The equipment wasn't secret. It was the project that was secret. But nonetheless, there were still weather balloons. And they claim that one of these came to ground in 1947, and it was that balloon. And that's why they kept it secret, you know. Hey, presto, up pops the alien autopsy film, which went around the world. Let's not, you know, it did. One of the things about the weather balloon theory was, of course, there were people that came forward and saying, well, not only did I see the crashed flying saucer at Roswell, I saw dead aliens as well. Some people even said one of them was alive for a while, you know. So there was bodies. So the Air Force had to account for what these bodies were. Well, there's no bodies attached to a weather balloon. So they said what these bodies were dummies, wooden dummies that were used for parachute testing. The only problem with that was that they didn't start using these wooden dummies until the 1950s, and Roswell was the 1940s. So when you go to the museum in Roswell, they've actually got a couple of these dummies, you know, on display, and they are just wooden mannequins that look like me and you, Andrew. They're just made of wood, you know. They attach them to a parachute and chuck them out somewhere and see what happened. So they claim that people have got two separate stories, 5 or 6 years apart, and you know, down the decades that they've emerged, and you've got this crash flying saucer and alien story. Again, I think if people came across a wooden dummy and they give it a kick, they'd soon find out it was a wooden dummy. But what is interesting is that the Air Force had always been pressured to come up with, well, okay, if it's balloons, where did these beings come from? What, you know, and it was only after the alien autopsy film came out that they changed it again and said, well, we think we've got an explanation for the aliens. It was actually these dummies.
And that's the problem, isn't it? Because when, as we said at the beginning, when you start changing the story, all the people who have their conspiracy theories and a certain view say, ha ha, there you go, somebody's telling a lie.
Yeah.
And in the same way as politicians they do their various misdemeanors throughout history, it's not necessarily the misdemeanor that is the problem, it's the cover up afterwards. And that's what leads to the problem. So there we have it. We have, it could have been a weather balloon, but not as we know it. What the explanation changed to say they've got something which was more military based, which might be a bit more logical. And so when you're analyzing that, that would explain why it didn't look like a normal weather balloon. But to have a passenger in it, I don't get that. Why would there be a passenger if it's like a military thing? Or are they trying to explain that they were hoping to do a test?
There weren't any passengers in it. That's the point. The
Right.
wooden dummies weren't used until 5 years later.
Right.
What they've said is people's imagination or their memories have got mixed up down the years, and these stories have merged somehow. A bit like, you know, legends do and folklore, you know. Right. Various things all seem to merge into the same story.
Does the official story say that there were passengers, whether they were dummies or not? Did they say that there were passengers, and did they give an explanation for that?
No, they say this was Project Mogul with this detecting equipment on it. That's what the balloons were. And then the dummies, although they were 5 or 6 years later, people have just got stories mixed up and jumbled together.
So the official story is there are no dummies, no people, no nothing.
Not with the balloons. No, they came later.
So in 1947, the official story is that yes, it was a weather balloon, but it had some extra kit on it, which was for military purposes, to spy on the Russians or to deal with that sort of stuff.
It was Project Mogul.
Project Mogul.
It wasn't the balloons or the equipment that was secret. It was the project for which they were being used.
And then the dummies is a bit of artistic license, or somebody thought they saw it and therefore somebody came up with an explanation for the dummies. But the official thing is there were no dummies. There were no people who don't need to give an explanation. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But pressure was put on them, you see, the Air Force, to come up for an explanation. Okay, if you're saying these are balloons, albeit, secret experiments, Project Mogul, then how do you explain the various testimony from reliable individuals, most of them, who claim to have seen these beings?
So and as we said beforehand, reliability about witnesses, because they're not here necessarily to tell the tale, is we would look at that. Do they have a vested interest? The most convincing witnesses from our point of view are people who have what I call a road to Damascus moment, when they are skeptics and then they suddenly change because of some sort of evidence that they have seen. Yeah. But everything has to be evidence-based.
Yeah, I mean, again, with Roswell, and like many cases of its kind, it starts off with something fairly humble, fairly mundane, some strange debris on your ranch, one morning that you've never seen before. And as far as Stanton Friedman is concerned, it then ends up being a cosmic Watergate. That is the word, that's the phrase he used. So yeah, you think, well, what happened in between, to get from A to B? And it is the witnesses. The thing about Roswell, there is no documentary evidence, no archaeological evidence,
no photographs, no sketches, nothing at all.
I mean, you think about this, Andrew. Let's assume that Stanton Friedman and his colleagues are right, that this was an alien spaceship that crashed. However, there was bodies there. Can you imagine the team or teams that from the different disciplines that would have been working on this? Cryptographers, biologists. I mean, you name it. You'd have had it would have been like the Manhattan Project all over again, So they would have created a paper trail that would have taken us to the end of the universe and back, probably,
literally. As you say. So what is, as you say, we can only base it on the evidence that we've got. Everything else is merely speculation. But based on the evidence, and you've been looking at this for most of your life, I imagine, what do you think happened? What is your opinion?
Well, one of the, there's a number of theories. What I said to people like Stanton, because he claims that the cover-up the lid was put on it straight away. Mm-hmm. That's why they changed the story the next day and everything was silenced. I said, well, let's just think about that for a moment. You're saying this is something from another world, and it scares the bejesus out of the authorities so much that they cover it up straight away. And not only do they keep the cover up in place then, it's kept in place even now. What on earth could it have been that you could identify? That's the problem, Andrew. If this was something from outer space, how would we be expected to identify it and then say, for some reason, we better keep that quiet? And none of them have an explanation. Now, there is a movie that was made called Hangar 18. It's loosely based on Roswell. And they get the spaceship and put it in a hangar. So it's the cover-up's not in place right away. And they research it. And it comes up that the creatures in there actually made us. And that's why the cover-up was put in place. But they actually took the time to do this. It wasn't as if they recognized it straight away, And I have to think the other way around. We go back to the era. It's 1947. The Cold War is just starting. You imagine the American president, that Earth's first contact is on American soil. Can you imagine the propaganda? Okay, it crashed, unfortunately, they've all died, but they came to American soil. not to the Soviets. You know, I mean, can you imagine the propaganda? You as the American president, not only have we got our nukes, but guess what we found here, guys? So don't you mess with it. I mean, but none of that happened. And we do know that both the US military and our own military, to a degree, down the years have done experiments with GIs and that they shouldn't have done. And it would not surprise me, because White Sands missile range wasn't that far from here. We had Operation Paperclip, you know, at the end of the war, bringing the German scientists over from Germany to work on the rocket program. It was the Germans that put man into space and onto the moon, you know, as far as the American side is concerned. So perhaps it's something along those lines that we're looking at, that it is something man-made. And it was something that broke treaties or was just morally reprehensible. And of course, once you lie about it, Andrew, it's best, you know, you can't go back on that, can you, with something like that?
Well, no, it's always the lie, it's always the cover-up. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first you practice.
Yes, well, we go back to the Profumo affair. It wasn't a fact that he was seeing a call girl. It was a fact that he lied in Parliament.
Yeah,
he lied.
Cover-up.
Yeah.
It's like cover-up which fans the flames, if you like, this conspiracy theories. But as I say, what I want to try and keep an open mind about this. I want to try and gather as much evidence as possible so we can look at it analytically. So the first explanation about it being a traditional weather balloon, we can almost dismiss, because they had those dropping out the sky all the time and people would have known. So the second explanation, that it was potentially a weather balloon, but it had this extra bit of equipment on for military purposes, and that's the reason they kept secret, has a bit more credibility.
Yeah, the only problem with Project Mogul is that all the records are kept, and there is no Project Mogul balloon launch that coincides with the actual dates in question.
And that's where you turn around and say, from that point of view, there's that sort of evidence. So somebody else, you say, well, where is the evidence? And all we can do is speculate without that evidence. And speculation is dangerous. When you're looking at it, as I say, from a criminal point of view, if you looked at it from a criminal point of view, is that it has to be beyond reasonable doubt. Now, clearly, there is doubt on every side because we don't have empirical evidence. You can turn around and listen and examine the explanation and say, does this sound right? Well, clearly not a balloon. You then turn around and say about this project, and where would the evidence be for that project? And if that's not there, that raises itself to say, well, what else is happening then? That doesn't make sense. So you then have to say, well, what else could it have been? And you're left with two theories, I guess. One is the official explanation. They keep covering it up because it is supposed to be a really top secret military experiment, if you like, and it failed and they didn't want it was going to be embarrassing, and therefore we had to cover that up. Or it did come from outer space.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair comment. And you know, like I said, I've been there, and if you can buy a map in Roswell, Andrew, and it's got at least three crash sites on it that I'm aware of. So even the main Roswell researchers don't agree themselves on what happened. Same with the witnesses. We talked about the credibility of the witnesses. I would say I met Marcel Jr. and he said, Philip, my whole involvement in this was for about 15 minutes. That's it. And I've never seen that material before or since. That's all I can tell you. So I don't think there's any doubt of his credibility. But there were one or two, you know, hoaxers came forward with fantastic stories that turned out to be nonsense. But there are still witnesses now who the main Roswell researchers will argue about whether they're dependable or not. And so that muddies the water even more. And one of the main researchers is a chap called Kevin Randall. Kevin was in the military himself. And I interviewed him earlier this year, and he'd done like a review of the evidence for it being extraterrestrial. And although he still believes that, he said that the evidence isn't as strong as first suspected. He says it's just like when you're interviewing these people and speaking to them, yeah, they are, but that bit of information is that you need to say, like you said, beyond reasonable doubt, always manages to be just out of your hand.
Yeah.
You've got your hand open, you think, here it comes, here it comes. Ah, no, gone. It always falls short. And I think, to Kevin's credit, he said that because he has a vested interest. He's a best-selling author in this field. So I think that's credit to Kevin. But, there are others who will say, no, it's definitely a flying saucer. The government have hidden it.
Yeah,
It's in hang or whatever, and that's it.
And this is the problem I've got, is when anybody says anything definite, because I get it, and I think we summarized it well a few minutes ago, is anything is where it's definite if you've got empirical evidence, this is what happened. You can say, it was this, it's a military operation, here's all the evidence to say this is what happened, or it's an alien landing and this is what happens. It is then definite. Nobody in this situation can say anything is definite because we haven't seen all of the evidence.
No, exactly. And what I do with this case or many others, I people know I've been involved in it for a long time. They say, what do you think, Philip? I said, I think you should just evaluate the evidence for yourself and come to your own conclusion. Don't listen to what I say. Don't listen to what anyone else says. Like the fictional fox molder, don't trust no one. Draw your own conclusions, because you may be the one that gets it right. Why not?
And we spoke about Nick Pope last time. He was saying that all the conspiracy theorists only have to be right once.
Well, we do know that the governments do keep secrets, and it is their duty to keep secrets. But that does not make it a conspiracy.
No, exactly. Nothing is stranger. Fact is sometimes stranger than fiction. So you're absolutely right. And this is why I say, when you look at credibility, because we don't know, all we can do is say, where is the evidence? We can base our judgment on the evidence. And I would welcome anybody, as always, if you have evidence and want to come and talk about it, and we can analyze it and discuss it, write to ufo@octopustv.com. That's ufo@octopustv.com. But in the next episode, Philip, we're going to get you back and we're going to talk a bit more about the alien autopsy, which spun out of this. But for now, Philip Mantle, thank you very much for being my guest.
My pleasure, Andrew. Thank you.
Bye-bye.